Minister, we saw lines of cars in the border region where you are there in the Gippsland area. People were queuing for hours and hours on end. Has that backlog cleared now?
Well, no, it hasn't, Danica. And the problem was people were on holiday, so were instructed basically before Christmas to not travel to Sydney. So a lot of people didn't go to Sydney. They went to what was known then as the green zones, those rural and regional areas, those coastal areas, to catch up with family and friends, whatever you normally do at this time of year. And then with very little notice, they were told they had to return home at the risk of having 14 days in quarantine. But they were also told you must have a test, a COVID test, within 24 hours. But unfortunately, a lot of the testing clinics didn't have appointments available for several days, so they couldn't even fulfil that basic requirement. So it has been a bit of a mess. It's been quite chaotic, and I have a lot of sympathy for those people who've had to return home in a hurry, and also have a lot of sympathy for the people who have had to come back and work at the testing clinics. They're trying to keep up now with quite a large backlog. Yesterday here in Lakes Entrance, we had lineups of 200 cars at different points where people were trying to get tested.
And what is the situation, as you said there, with the testing clinics in the Gippsland area? Are there enough to cope with this demand?
Well, I think there's enough clinics in place now, and they've had to bring staff back from their annual leave. And keep in mind, some of the people who are now working at testing clinics would have been in New South Wales on holidays themselves. I mean, they were taking a break, a well-deserved break, so had to gear up very quickly. The precipitous nature of the border closure is what really concerned a lot of people. And you've got to keep in mind, Danica, New South Wales is about 800,000 square kilometres. It's more than 3 times the size of the United Kingdom. It's a vast state. The areas impacted, those hotspot areas where COVID active cases have been recorded, were obviously places you shouldn't have been going to visit. But people were out there exploring regional New South Wales. They might have been out the back of Burke somewhere. They might have been camping. They might have their swags, their caravans. And they were told with very short notice, you have to get home or you'll face 14 days of quarantine.
We now have this situation, Minister, where there are thousands of Victorians stranded in New South Wales. They could be stuck there for who knows how long, because if their exemption doesn't get approved to re-enter Victoria, well, they just can't go. The federal government is now being urged to come back to the table on state border closures. Has the Morrison government been too quiet on this issue?
Oh, Danica, I think, to be fair, we can't really blame the federal government for state governments closing their own borders. I mean, if you have, the view I have to this is there's been a lack of understanding by some of the people making these decisions in the cities about how our border communities work from day one. So along the Victorian-New South Wales border, it's almost seamless. People go back and forth across the border every day. There's no passports here in Australia. You go across state borders as required. So I think it's a bit unfair to be blaming the federal government for decisions made by the states which have a direct impact on people's lives and their livelihoods. But if I had my way, those border closures wouldn't have happened. But I can't make premiers do something they don't want to do. I think the impact it's had on people in those border communities has been quite devastating, and slowly they've had some common sense come into it in Victoria and New South Wales, where there's been a border bubble. So there has been a return to people being able to move back and forward across the border, but a lot of damage was done in the early days, and we don't want to be closing these borders in such a precipitous nature and then having people strand on the wrong side. So look, I'd be urging the Victorian health authorities to show some compassion here, to work with these people who did nothing wrong. Don't blame them for going on a holiday when they've been locked up for months this year. Find a way to get them home. Help them perhaps quarantine in their own homes back here in Victoria. They'll do the testing. Victorians have been very good at doing the testing, so help them out here. Don't blame them.
OK, but you've seen the impact of this firsthand in the Gippsland region. We saw last year National Cabinet failed to be able to agree to a national definition of a hotspot. The question is, how long can this go on for if Scott Morrison is not prepared to step in and we can't rely on states and territories to make up their minds on borders?
But Danica, it's a bit like asking Scott Morrison to play the dad in this, saying, kids, stop fighting amongst each other, I'm going to be dad and make some new rules here.
Well, there's a lot of infighting at the moment, though, Minister. I mean, there's Victoria and New South Wales at loggerheads over how to handle the situation.
But Danica, the federal government and the Prime Minister can't stop the states from acting within their constitutional rights. Now, I think it's wrong. You might think it's wrong. The people who live on the borders certainly think it's wrong. We need to convince the premiers that they're making a mistake here, that when you have a breakout, people expect those areas to be locked down and for people to take the appropriate precautions in those areas, but not to shut down a whole state as a result. As I said before, New South Wales is more than 800,000 square kilometres. It's a vast state. To think that you would shut down all of that state for Victorians all at once when only a couple of weeks earlier we'd been describing some parts of Victoria as green zones. Really was sending a signal to Victorians it was okay to go and visit those places for Christmas, catch up with your family, have a bit of a break and come back refreshed in 2021. Then to precipitously shut that border and say, by the way, if you're not back by midnight, you're having 14 days in quarantine, I think was quite unfair. And now we've got to find a compassionate way to get those people who are north of the border, who want to come home, get them back across the border, do the appropriate test. They'll do the test. They want to come home with their families and friends and be part of their own community again.
Well, fingers crossed a decision can be made. I'm sure there's a lot of families that would like to get home soon. Minister, I want to ask you about 1 year on now from those devastating bushfires in the Gippsland area, particularly around Mallacoota. How is the region rebuilding?
Well, first of all, I have to say to everyone who's listening around Australia that we are so grateful and so thankful for the support we received in the immediate aftermath of the fires. We had a great amount of compassion from Australians, a lot of donations, a lot of support was given to us in the Gippsland area. You know, 1 year on, it's a long road to recovery. A lot of houses are now starting to be rebuilt, which is great to see, so people are getting back into their houses, building new homes. The public infrastructure, those walking trails and infrastructure on public land hasn't been built as quickly as we'd like to see, so there's still some burnt assets that need to be replaced. And given now, Danica, with the COVID travel issues, we know that a lot of people are going to explore regional Australia for the next couple of years. We need to make sure our tourism product in those coastal regional towns is up to scratch. So we need to crack on with that in 2021 and get all the money that's been promised out the door, deliver everything we can for those communities. But I need to say again, we're so thankful. Our community is so resilient. They've been through a tough time, but they're looking after each other and they're a strong community.